All right, hi. Um, Welcome back. I'm taking a formal break from work. I'm like emotionally, mentally exhausted right now. And I figured this would be a good time to talk about tidal waves in the professional context, like whether you're in a work environment or if you're in your own business, things like that. Because quite frankly, despite the fact that business requires a certain level of performance from all of us, we're still human, and tidal waves kind of come with that territory, right? So what I'll do is I'll share with you my experiences with that. Last year especially has been pretty intense in terms of tidal waves, demon swings, things like that at work. And then I'm gonna kind of go through why that happens. Go through a definition of terms, and then just give some pointers. So, starting off, I guess story time. So for me, I don't know if you guys fully know my type, but I am an audio NETE play consume blast. So I have quite a few demons, right? The biggest demon, of course, would be the sleep, the SF sleep. But then also there's demon ST blast, which I get in a lot of trouble for. There's demon FI, which I get a lot of trouble for, and demon SI, which I get a lot of trouble for. And what do I mean by that? Well, one thing that happens, this has been happening at all the work environments that I would be at, is there would come a point pretty soon, let's say after the honeymoon phase, like the first 2-3 months or whatever, where I emotionally am not fully engaged. I'm like, I may be miserable in certain days, not motivated certain days, right? So my emotions aren't in a good place, and usually my emotions are very hard to move, right? So once they kind of stay in that place, sometimes I may even start infecting other people around me with negativity, my friends, my family, even coworkers with my complaints and stuff like that, which tends to build up over time into a tidal wave. But then also, more importantly, the SI, right? You know how they joke around how Demon SI or SI Last is afraid of paperwork? That is also me. As we speak, I have a bunch of. It's weird because I actually have a bunch of sales opportunities, right, just sitting there, and it's just like I'm like, I gotta allocate time to like fill the paperwork out right, and I put $2 more on this form by accident, and I gotta correct that, and it's just like immediately mentally draining, right? And usually, much like a lot of demons, I tend to avoid that. I procrastinate on that, and then over time, unfortunately, that ends up, with things being delayed for the customer, which is very frustrating. Being delayed internally, which frustrates a lot of people that I work with, and then ultimately, especially because I work in sales in a very performance-based role, it ends up hindering my performance. Quite frankly, I would attribute me avoiding my demons or letting them pile up in a negative way. I would attribute that to why, especially last year, was so hectic for me, right? Like I was like I was barely selling anything, and I was kind of in like this constant anxiety state. And so I say this one because that's my experience. I can only speak from my experience to some extent when it comes to tidal waves. And then what ends up happening is, yes, that there's a buildup, and then usually there's like 1 month or 2 months where like just everything hits at once, right? Like social problems, personal problems, business problems, right? Like my emotions are stressed out, right? All the paperwork is messed up all at once, right? Things like that. That's my experience. I can't speak for anyone else personally, but just given the fact that you're a human, and unless you're an alpha that I don't know about, you're probably experiencing some form of cycle like that, right? Where you're avoiding things, your things make you uncomfortable, and then it comes to a point where because you've been avoiding it for so long, it just slams down back on you, right? So what do you do? Well, I would say two things. One, you have to get the information right. I'm an observer. You got to get the info right about what a tidal wave is. And then the second thing is, well, just use that information to, plan accordingly, right? So let me share with you my personal definition of what a tidal wave is. I'll include this in the description. This is coming from my checklist. It's on page 2. So I have a bit of notes on a tidal wave. But how I define it personally is a large amount of real life problems that hit a person all at once because the person refused to complete uncomfortable and tiny objective tasks associated with their last animal specifically for a long period of time, which leads to an intense amount of tantrums, freakouts from the person, where they blame aspects of the outside world associated with their last function for their quote unquote unfair life problem that they really caused, right? I have some links as to, if you want to check my sources, but mostly it's going to come from, I think this is coming from the Last Animal Q&A actually, where David and Shan talk about specifically that most of your problems are coming because you're not putting time into your last animal. So for me, that would be sleep, that would be stopping, literally, like literally stopping. I just learned, this year that stop was literal. So taking breaks, putting on the brakes in the sense of, cutting off conversations with people, cutting off even productivity, and just letting your body recover, letting your mind recover. And then also stopping and going over known information, right? So that I'm not constantly re-asking the same question like 50 different times, pissing everyone off. I'm not constantly getting distracted by the new latest thing, and I can stay focused, right? So because I'm not doing enough sleep, ultimately, that's where a lot of my tidal waves and discomfort is coming from. But this could be different. I mean, this is going to be different for everyone, right? Unless you're my exact type, right? This is going to be unique to you, but just know that the last animal is usually where most of the tidal wave is building up for you, and the last function is what you're going to look on the outside world and blame everything on, right? Like, so for me, it's like the paperwork. It's always the paperwork. It's always, oh, this admin stuff is annoying and it's antiquated, and who wants to do this dumb shit, and I don't have to, like, I literally still complain about that. I was like, why should I be doing this? I work in sales. I shouldn't be an admin at the same time, and, things like that. But the harsh reality is no one gives a shit, right? Like, you got to do what you got to do. And unless you can afford to get into a better job, hey, go for it. If you can afford to get into a better system, let's say if you're an observer like me, go for it. But ultimately, because you're avoiding your last animal, you're going to start noticing, unless you deal with that, you're going to notice that everywhere you go, all of the same problems, follow you around. It's like, well, and you're going to blame it on the outside world as if, oh, well, why can't they get their things together? No, it's you. Like, it's you. It's actually you. That's the problem. So what do you do about that problem? Well, it's kind of in the definition, right? So part one is you have to understand what's going on, right? That's the observer side. That's the infodom side. And you have to, so one thing Dave and Shan say a lot that I truly believe in is trust the math, right? There's that saying, you got to trust that even if it doesn't make sense, even if it doesn't resonate in the moment, if you look at the piece of paper that's your type, and if you look at what your last animal is and what your last function is, just assume that that's where the problems are coming from, right? Even if it does not feel that way, even if it might not make sense in that moment. And that's kind of what they refer to as trust the math, right? I swear by this because, it's one of those things where sometimes I will trust the math and it ends up being a little bit off, right? Maybe it's my second animal that's a problem, right? So for me, it's not always the fact that I need to take breaks, although that's helpful because I burn out a lot of energy. Sometimes I'm literally under communicating with customers, with prospects, with my manager and stuff like that, and I'll get in trouble for that, right? Like, this is bad. Don't follow this. But quite frankly, there have been many situations where it's like customers haven't heard from me for a week because I'm exhausted ultimately, but because they haven't heard from me, they're like, well, is everything okay? And then they get frustrated, they complain and stuff like that. And they have every right to do that because I'm not blasting enough, right? And maybe you can relate to that as well. It's not always going to come from that last animal, let's say superficially, right? It might be the third animal that you have that's a demon. But ultimately, like I said, if you trust it, it's gonna yield results 80 to 90% of the time, right? If you trust that, okay, whether I feel like it or not, I need to do sleep in my case, or I need to do my last animal, and whether I know it or not, all of my complaints are coming from my frustration at my last function. If you operate with that assumption, you're gonna get way farther than if you just keep bitching and complaining and everything's unfair. It's just not sustainable either, right? The only way to solve tidal waves is to chip away at, actually solving them instead of complaining about them, right? And then, so that's the info dom side, right? Like, get the right info. The second part of it is the energy dom, and the decider side is that you got to do something, right? Like, you got to actually chip away at the issue. Now, this is going to be difficult because, again, you're fighting against yourself in a way, right? You're fighting against your own personality. You're fighting against your own habits, all the habits that you built over the first, years of your life. You're fighting against all of the reinforcement that you've given for doing something a certain way, and you're basically going the opposite way of what you normally do. And that's going to be extremely uncomfortable, right? Especially at work, where you're like, man, I already got all this stuff to do, and now you're telling me to do this thing that I'm bad at and I'm uncomfortable by, and I'm probably going to do it wrong the first 50 times anyway, you know? But it's a decision. You have to make a decision of, okay, what I would recommend for the decision is chip away at it over a period of time. So for me personally, sleep and really also SI stuff, right? Paperwork and stuff. I'm like, okay, I'll allocate an hour of tiny wins, and that's it. Like after that, I know I'm mentally tapped out. I'm gonna watch like Pokemon YouTube videos or whatever. I don't even know what I watch these days. I've been playing Pokemon, but I'm gonna watch some random thing, and I'm gonna be distracted for 80% of the day. But as long as I put in a certain amount of time in, you know, that's good enough, and I will count that as a win, even if it doesn't feel like that, right? So I would recommend doing that for the last animal, and I would recommend doing that for the last function. And how that translates in real life is wherever there's areas in your life where you're blaming, to put in a little bit of time to do, like to take responsibility for that and actually try solving it, even if it feels unfair. So that would deal with the last animal, or last function, sorry. And then in areas where you feel like I don't have to do anything at all, right? That would be the last animal. It's like, okay, fine, but still put in a little bit of time. So for me, for example, taking naps or taking breaks throughout the day, or taking at least one break for the day. Sometimes I don't even do that, right? Often I don't usually do that. But getting some of that recovery time so that I can do more, even if I don't feel like it, I put it on my little to-do list, you know, at one point, and I'm like, hey, okay, it feels artificial, it's gonna feel fake, but you still gotta do it anyway. So I guess the last thing I'll say is, for anyone who's in the middle of a tidal wave, I feel for you, for real. Tidal waves suck, but especially at work, it can be really bad. I remember last year, especially, like, I would let personal issues outside of work leak into my work, and it would just I was just miserable throughout the day, and nothing would get done because I'm carrying misery from place to place, right? I do not want that for you. But one thing I would definitely say is, for work, if you can, you gotta like section that off from the rest of your life, right? Work is work, and then your personal life is your personal life. If you can create a boundary there, at the very least, even if your personal life might be burning down, if you're able to create a boundary, work might be a safe haven for you if you start chipping away at it, right? And that's something I am starting to experience a little bit, right? So anyway, this is my little ramble. Hope this is helpful and meaningful to you. Feel free, if you guys are experiencing tidal waves at work, or have experienced tidal waves at work, feel free to leave a comment about, hey, if something's working for you, great. If you're still struggling with it, also, you know, feel free to share it, and I'd love to kind of see how I can help you. And then also, you know, some people who have been finding it meaningful to set up snugs with me for a little bit one-on-one time. If you want to kind of say things that you can't say in comments, I understand. You know, I'll put it in the description at the end as well. So other than that, hope you guys are having a great day so far, or whenever you're watching this. Have a great rest of the day, and I will see you in the next video that I make. Take care.